And now I would like to present Sondos Shabayek, journalist, dramatist, director, and activist. Welcome, Sondos.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be here and even more honored to be speaking right after two very great ladies. I kind of feel I have nothing to say. Back in my country, I don't introduce myself as a playwright or a theater director because they don't take that seriously. When I tell anyone this is what I do, they would go like, okay, what do you do in the morning? Because they assume this is a hobby that we do in the afternoon. My mother keeps asking me, I don't understand what you're doing. Theater in my country, unfortunately, is looked on as a form of art that is regarded either as useless, boring art or one that's only for intellectuals and educated people. There is some truth, though, to what's being said about theater in Egypt, and that is it's very hard for you to make a living out of that. I personally have not figured out a way, so I kind of freelance and spend the money I get on the projects I do. Of course, you're all waiting for me to start speaking about the revolution. No one wants to listen to anything from any Egyptian other than the revolution. The question I've been always asked since the 18 days is, especially by foreigners or people or Arabs generally, is what is the role of women in the revolution? And it has become such a redundant question that it turned into an inside joke in Cairo between my friends and I. Because there's always this assumption that there's a different role for men and women. Every single time you ask this question, I'm like, to the extent that we started trying to come up with creative, sarcastic answers. A friend of mine would once say, and excuse me for saying that, once told the journalist, women breastfeed. And some would say they would cook. But the thing is that when you see the videos and pictures and the facts and figures regarding the events that happened, you could easily tell that women were at the same place men were, and they did the same thing men did, except perhaps pee on the square. But otherwise, it was pretty much the same. Anyways, before the revolution, I was part of a theater project called Tahrir Monologues, and that's a performance of stories of women in Egypt inspired by the very famous vagina monologues. It's an annual performance of stories collected each year and performed. General stories about womanhood in general, not necessarily regarding their sexuality only. Of course, I needn't talk about the feedback. The young loved us, but the old people wanted to chop our heads off all the time. On the 24th of January 2011, I was a journalist and an editor, and aspiring to make it into the world of investigative journalism. On the 25th of January, I stopped reporting and took to the streets with my BlackBerry and my flip camera, with my eyes always stuck to the Twitter account. And for the 18 days, I did not report or write a single journalistic piece of work. My words were tweets, 140 characters, and stories videotaped with my camera. I was very shocked by how the agendas of all different medias got exposed, including the independent media. I was so shocked at the amount of news left out. Being on the square, you had a different perspective when you would read the newspapers or watch the TV. You were able to tell what they chose to leave out. You were able to tell what they chose to kind of reflect in a very different way. But what got to me the most is that they kept insisting on leaving out the idea that this was very personal. Everything was devoid of emotions, even though, to me, the revolution was very personal and very emotional. And it was then that I felt I kind of started drifting away from journalism and media to theater, this open space, unrestricted, where you do whatever and people don't ask you to not take it personally or not write down your emotions. During the 18 days of the revolution, people either went around the square chanting, held signs asking Mubarak to step down using creative and humorous statements. Like you'd find a guy with really long hair carrying a sign that says, "Please step down, I need to shave," and so on. I know that it was very, I can't believe we actually took this in a very happy way. People outside would be writing in the newspapers that we were being paid in euros and taking Kentucky meals to protest. And then you'd go in the square and you'd find people walking around with cheese sandwiches and the sign Kentucky underneath, and they were joking about it. Storytelling was taking place every single second on the square. Every time someone recalled how he threw a stone at a police officer during the violent attacks, how another took a bullet through his shoulder. I'm sorry, doing a speech is very hard, performing is so much easier. And after the 18 days, you'd get into a cab, and then he'd automatically start telling his story. You'd get into a gathering with friends, and then everyone would start sharing a moment or an incident or a situation that happened for like the 20th time, and we'd still listen over and over again. We loved those casual storytelling moments. It kept reminding us of what we were part of, what we were finally able to do. It gave us hope. It was truly like opium during hard times. A week later, after Mubarak stepped down, on the 17th of February, I remember, I emailed a group of friends who worked with me on the Tahrir Monologues and asked them if they'd be interested to gather stories and tell stories from Tahrir. And that's simply how we started Tahrir Monologues, a performance of stories from the revolution, an amateur attempt to document personal testimonies of people, what we've been through and how we felt, stories that won't be put in any newspaper or TV news or go down in history books, stories that we felt that we want our next generation to find an alternative source of history, away from the hands of the state and the politicians. And from May 2011 till March 2012, we went around Cairo, Alexandria, and Minya, telling stories from the revolution, using an ongoing process of story collection and recruitment of storytellers. You don't have to be a performer or an actor or tell the story. You don't need to be an author. You just need to tell the story, to have a story. And throughout the past almost 2 years, I have watched people from different backgrounds and fields come together to tell their stories on the 25th of January and later on. The open call said, "What were you doing and how did you feel?" Telling stories empowered us, gave us a sense of direction and purpose. We told stories of blood, tears, and laughter. The audience would be seen laughing, then crying, then laughing, then crying. One of the comments I love best about the performance that I get from the audience is, "You made us cry and laugh at the same time." And I would always say that it's not me, it's the stories, the 18 days, the revolution. I recall how protesters would sometimes recognize the storytellers in our group on the square later in later events and express how the stories motivated them, gave them hope, and gave others a reason to take to the streets again. We did not have any funding or support, yet we were able to put on more than 20 performances anywhere we were allowed to, in bookshops, sit-ins, schools in poor district areas. When we felt that most of the venues in Cairo were restricted to professionals or people with connections, we just decided to create a stage anywhere. So we did a performance in the underground metro stations and inside the metro carriages. I know a lot of events had happened since Mubarak stepped down, and a lot feel that the revolution was just a happy summer breeze. The project is still ongoing because we feel that there is still a lot of stories to tell, a lot of people who don't know, and a lot of people who are turning a blind eye to everything that happened. Storytelling has become our own tool for self-empowerment, our tool to resist and remember. Now the group works on both Tahrir Monologues and Tahrir Monologues, two very different projects. One is obviously very feminist, and the other, I'm always told, very masculine, because most of the storytellers are males. But we're left with a very strong feeling of empowerment. We no longer censor our work. We don't take out words we feel people would find offensive, as long as they are in the actual real stories. We reflect and tell the stories as they are and learn to kind of try and push our boundaries. I personally do not think that anything in my country till this moment has changed. The laws do not protect freedom of expression, and the state censorship is pretty much still the same. And people will always give you a hard time anywhere you go, and every single time you try to do something different or daring. I believe that nothing has changed but us, and I truly think that this makes all the difference. Thank you.